Hey everyone, thanks for joining for another live. Today we've got a good one. We've got a really interesting one today. I'm looking forward to this. So this is my friend Benny. I know Benny very well. He's a good friend of mine. And he asked a question on Instagram. By the way, I love, sometimes people think that they're being sort of, what's the word? They're being sort of aggressive, or they're being too like controversial or too like in my face to ask me questions. Don't always feel free to ask me questions, even if you feel like it's not an appropriate question. So this is Benny's question. I think it's very well asked. I'm going to highlight this part in a second, but let's read his whole comment. So this is my post was like, what's one health food you quit? And saw immediate improvements. For me, it was broccoli. I'll tell that story in a minute. Benny says, sorry, I don't agree. Why do you need to quit broccoli? Isn't the problem more about considering it or anything else as a super health food, a magic bullet, and having copious amounts of it? I agree with that much. We buy it once in a while, and it's part of a mix of various vegetables in addition to different kinds of meat and fish. Now, this is the part I really want to hone into on this video. The more diversity of fruits, vegetables, grains, and meat you have in your diet, the better, right? Frankly, the only thing I consider worth quitting is alcohol. Fine, perfect, great. The first thing to say to Benny and anyone else is, hey, it's your life. I'm not telling you how to live your life. And the only thing I'm sharing is my own experience and the experience of my clients and why we take some of these foods away. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is, look, I think the starting point is this idea of balance. Let's go back to his post. So he has this idea of the idea behind this is the idea of a balanced plate, right? The more diversity, the better, right? And I just want to question that as a fundamental principle of the human diet, right? And I want to ask the question: is there any other biological system for whom we can say the more different kinds of foods that they're eating, the better off they are, right? Is there any carnivorous, omnivorous, or even herbivorous species like that? And just thinking through it a little bit from a first principles point of view, if you take carnivores, yeah, they eat lots of things, but in general, they eat only sort of one category of things in general, right? In general, the lions near here will try and hunt bigger game if they can. If they can't, they'll hunt the smaller pigs and rabbits and stuff and so on, right? And they'll survive. But they're all eating like mostly protein. Their digestive system is designed to digest a large amount of protein, right? Or if you look at even at herbivores, they're eating literally the same species of grass the year round in most cases, or the same species of foliage. If you look at the deer and the antelope and so on, right? So, and I don't think there might be some variation in that people can do different, that some animals can do different things in different seasons. But if you look at cows in a farm, for example, they're eating fresh grass for most of the year, and in the wintertime when there's not fresh grass, they're eating that same grass, but it's been turned into hay, right? And they do fine, right? So in some cases, these animals only need one species. In some cases, they may need several, but they're related. Even if we look at omnivores, so look at true omnivores like a bear, for example, the brown bear in Alaska and California and so on eats a diet of mostly whatever it can find, but whatever it finds within a certain milieu, right? So these days they eat human garbage. Let's leave that aside. In the natural world, what are they eating? They're eating fish at a certain time of year, right? They're eating berries at a certain time of year to fatten up, right? And then they're hibernating for a big chunk of the year. They're not eating anything, right? And then again, in the springtime, what are they eating? Maybe some foliage, maybe some smaller animals and so on. So if you look at the actual number of species that they're eating, yes, it's an omnivorous animal. They have both plants and animals, but it's a very small selection of species. Now, someone will say, look, Samir, when we look at humans, you look at, say, the Hadza, which is a community here in Africa that I've studied, true that the Hadza eat a whole variety of plants. They eat many, many plant species. But that's what they have to do in order to survive, because the Hadza are an oppressed minority community where they live in Tanzania and maybe Kenya and other places as well in East Africa, right? They are at the bottom of the hierarchy. They are trying to survive, and so they have adapted these various survival strategies, which include eating whatever 200 species of plants and so on. So it's very difficult to draw conclusions from what the Hadza are doing today to survive from what traditional societies would have been doing 1,000 years ago, whatever. So that's one thing, is like, where does this balance plate idea come from? And the fossil evidence and what I've seen as an anthropologist does not back it up at all. That's not what humans were eating. Yes, humans may have been eating, a small variety of plant species, like 2 or 3 or 4, But there's no this idea that the more the better. That's a really, really bad starting point. The other thing I just want to touch on in what he said is, um, so certain things here, like fruits and vegetables, you could make a case for. Even broccoli, you could make a case for. But grains, I don't think you can make a case for. In the case of grains, the anti-nutrient qualities are just too much. And here I'm going to share a screen from I think this is from Harvard. Yeah, so it's about anti-nutrients. It's about so when we're talking about broccoli, why did my health improve when I got rid of broccoli? Probably because it's a goitrogenic food, right? All plants. I think this is a principle that we need to get into a little bit in this video too. All plants have anti-nutrients, right? What are anti-nutrients? Anti-nutrients are what the plant needs in order to survive. Because if the plant didn't have that, it would have been dead. These plants would have gone extinct ages ago. They would have been killed mostly by insects, right? They have natural pesticides, if you want to think about it that way. And these are some classifications of those pesticides, right? So goitrogenic vegetables are all of your cruciferous stuff, the Brussels sprouts and so on. Glucosinolates, right? They also interfere with iodine uptake, right? Then we have lectins, which are very famous. The most famous lectin is called gluten. Everyone would have heard of that. Oxalates, there's been a lot written about oxalates recently, phytates, saponins, tannins, right? So these are all the anti-nutrients that keep the plant alive. And in small doses, there is an argument that something like sulforaphane, which I'll talk about here, sulforaphane, so this is from health.com website, okay? And, there is evidence that sulforaphane is beneficial. But if it's beneficial, you have to understand why it's beneficial. It's beneficial because it is toxic, right? So it's toxic, and the thinking is that the immune system can overcome that toxicity and sort of get stronger. That which does not kill me makes me stronger kind of thinking. This is hormesis. This is why exercise works, for example, right? But when we look at animal studies and we can give them sulforaphane, we do see that sulforaphane is toxic. I would argue it's very toxic, right? So these things haven't been studied in terms of what is the safe dose, what is not the safe dose. All I know is when I see clients and they have thyroid issues, when I see clients and they have kidney stones, and we take these vegetables out, they always get better. That's all I know, right? Because there is no detailed evidence base. I can't say taking it out is going to cure you. I can't make that claim. But I do know that the chemicals in there make you sick. That's what they're designed to do, right? So again, coming back to this question, is a balanced plate always better? No, I don't think so. If it may be the case that in your specific case, it may work for you. And if it's working for you, I got nothing to say. Good for you. Well done. But my suspicion is at a certain point, it will stop working for you. And you'll need to take some of these foods, which I don't think are fit for human consumption. You'll need to take some of them out, right? Now, back to the question of broccoli. I mean, I think it's really useful to understand that broccoli is part of a whole family of plants that evolved from mustard, at a time when it evolved in an area and at a time when slavery was going up. So it was a slave society, and slave owners needed to find ways to feed their population in a cheap way with basically rubbish, right? And so these were the things that were developed. Now, the way the plants look today and the way they taste today isn't the way that they tasted even 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, I can remember tasting Brussels sprouts in my youth. They were the most horrible things ever. And now they have been, again, further bred and modified and so on. Not genetic modification, this is traditional breeding to make them more sweet and more tasty and so on. And yes, to lower the percentage of anti-nutrients in there. So in some ways they're safer. But the problem is, again, we see this, that people are taking the same vegetables again and again, and that is really making things bad. So anyway, some food for thought here. At the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you what to do. You guys have to decide what's best for you. All I'm telling you is that if you are not thriving, then the first thing we would do is to say, look, what is your diet? And what is the traditional human diet that humans would have thrived on, would have lived on? And based on all of the evidence, that is a hyper-carnivorous diet with less than 20% of your food coming from things that are not animal sourced. So I would say eggs and meat are the safest. If you want to include dairy, that's a different discussion. We can have that discussion another day. But if 80% of your diet is eggs and meat and some of the remaining 20% is broccoli, I think that's still totally fine. No big issue. But if you're not doing 80% of your diet is eggs and meat and you're not thriving, then I would say that's the place to pick up. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to approach things a little bit more deliberately and I'm trying to explain things a little bit more clearly from a first principles point of view. Because frankly, the nutrition science as it currently exists is such a muddle, it's such a mess. We have to go back to the anthropological roots, and in my view, also the pre-colonial history, right? When we're talking about ancient Greece, when we're talking about some of these societies where these vegetables were developed, they were developed in the context of a class society, and they were not what rich people were eating. I mean, you can even look at imperial Chinese cookbooks. I remember this was a complaint of my uncle who owned the first Chinese restaurant in what is today Bangladesh, and he was invited to go on a tour of China in the 1960s or 70s. I'm not sure exactly when, but he did the tour, and at the end of the tour, he was like, "You guys didn't feed me any of the famous dishes, which are fried rice and fried noodles, basically." And the Chinese told him, "Look, that's poor people's food. That's not really." Once we had our revolution, once we had the communist revolution, it's like we can eat those things, but we would prefer to that everyone has access to the foods that the rich people used to have in ancient China, right? Which was meat, fish, fowl, eggs, that kind of stuff, right? So it's very fascinating to think about this from a class point of view. But when you're thinking about the role of vegetables in the diet, don't believe the hype. Number one, there's no evidence for the hype. There's no evidence that eating vegetables is good for you. And number two, think about the class context within which these foods became popularized. Again, not to say anything against anyone's culture, not to say anything against your favorite food. Like, eat what you want. I'm not telling you what to do. But you have to understand that if you're not thriving, a first principles approach can at least help to get you there. Okay? Some thoughts. Thank you from non-civil servants for the hello. Hi to you. Thanks everyone for watching. I will continue to do these for the next week or so, and then I might take a break. Thanks so much. Talk to you in the next one.